Cliff Krieger, your host. I'm joined by Bill Johnson, who is a Lowellian and a professor at UMass Lowell. We may get into universities sometime today. But you do finance, right?
Yes.
So I'm hoping Fru's going to,
Mike is here. He's coming in a second.
and Mike Smith is here. Fru, I wanted to talk about cocoa production in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. But,
Story.
yeah, Fru, we've been talking about the new economic alignment with Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and we'd slipped over to the question of cocoa production, and I was struck by the fact that Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, back in the 70s, for a candy bar being sold, 50% of that money would go back to the cocoa producers. By the 1980s, it was 16%, and today it's only 6%. So the farmers are making $1 a day in Ghana and 78 cents a day in Cote d'Ivoire. I mean, is that reasonable with the exchange value would change that much? What do you think, Bill?
Well, Cliff, the thing is, when I was growing up, education was real education. They teach you you go to school, they teach you a craft to make brooms, to make things from the local environment. And when they talk about a market, when you go to the market, you see what local people produce to come and sell. But now and then, that's when you ask business people, then you will see what they produce to bring. But the thing is, the West and the East brought in their own type of marketing economy, whereby it made the local Africans depend on trade. You are trading from someone who manufactures. So when you ask most of the business people, they are selling. They are not selling what they produce. And then they are selling what comes from outside. So that is why the economics of West Africa are dependent on the currency of the West. So that if the currency goes down, they cannot depend on themselves because they have to buy from outside. And their own production is the production of raw material that fits these industries outside that determine the cost of the value of their products. I think what is going on in the Sahel, they have noticed this. If you realize how the Chinese came out, they had to step back and do their cultural revolution. And in that cultural revolution, they built their own economic system and educate their minds as to where they were going, that not to be self-reliant. And when they came out, now they are a giant in economy, not depending on outside. So that is what if you see the trend in Africa, they are changing the educational system. Because when they rely on the East and on the West, they are bringing their own system of education to make the Africans always be at the receiving end than not the producing end and always dependent.
I want to say good morning to Kim Scott. She's watching this morning. So good morning, Kim. Back over to you, Cliff.
Okay. Bill, you got any thoughts?
So I think Fru raises a couple of really important points. They're kind of points regarding globalization in general. I mean, these are the growing pains we've had for the last 100 years or more. That it's always cheaper to do certain things in certain places. If Africa wants its own self manufacturing area, it's going to have some sort of protection from outside, manufactured brooms. If it wants to make brooms locally, the only way those brooms are going to survive and that industry will survive is if you charge tariffs or somehow keep out inexpensive, manufactured brooms from outside. So I think that's a natural growing pain. The local areas that have specific crops, I mean, we talked about cocoa in specifically, they will have an advantage, although as you mentioned, Cliff, the amount of value that's going to the original cocoa producers is declining. I think a lot of that is probably they've gotten more efficient at producing it, and there's probably other places to get cocoa from now. I just looked up, Cote d'Ivoire has, I think it's only 30% of the cocoa production. So it's, probably that's part of it too. There's probably other places in South America maybe that you can get cocoa as well. And that will bring down, how much they're able to demand from cocoa production.
Yeah, Fru's trying to say something there. So.
Sorry.
I was saying that Africa is more than a billion market. Look at the European market.
Yep.
What the young Africans now are saying is that if Europe can be one market, you travel from any country in Europe with a single passport. All these artificial boundaries that the colonizers put amongst Africa because of themselves, the Congo, Belgium, you leave Congo just to even cross over Rwanda. That's like one country. You have the French. To go over to Uganda, you have the English. To go to Equatorial Guinea, you have the Spanish. To go to Mozambique, you have the Portuguese. So now you see that, I mean, in Europe you can travel with one passport and go everywhere. That's one market. They are bringing down all these artificial barriers, and these artificial barriers were imposed by the West so as to control the economic system of that area. And mostly Africans are realizing that they consume what they don't produce and produce what they don't consume. So they are looking back to themselves. That even in terms of the barriers or whatever, if they break these internal barriers amongst themselves and facilitate with infrastructure, transportation, communication, I mean, their economy, they will be self-sufficient and be more economic viable at the international stage than going with these tiny little countries. A country like Equatorial Guinea is not up to 1 million. If they want to go and negotiate with China or the US, they go like one country which is not even up to the population of a small state in the US. And that is a design by the outside world to be able to control these places. This new generation, they have educated far and wide around the world. They see how it works. And all the people who are ruling the world now, from the western to the eastern, are their own colleagues. So when they come back to Africa, they see what they are trying to do to their parents or so. They are standing up and say, no, this is not fair. We can manage our own system. We are educated enough. You don't need to come and dictate to us as if you are bringing solutions to us.
I think in fairness, we ought to point out that boundaries that were imposed by the West were partly to keep down fighting amongst Western nations.
I think Africa actually has a very powerful future. It's it's either one of the youngest or the youngest continent in many places, of course, in Europe and North America and in developed Asia, in places like Japan. We have aging populations, and Africa does not have this problem. So I think, there's a lot of promise in this. I think the political institutions need to catch up. I do think there's a lot of promise in countries being able to work together, but they have to show that they can work together. I'm hopeful for Africa. They have to show that they can do this, right? That these countries can work together and they can form these coalitions. I agree with you that a small country negotiating with the U.S. or Europe or China is at a disadvantage when they have 1 million people or even 5 million people. So I think you're right that forming these political unions will be helpful. I think that's going to be a hard sell for a lot of places in Africa, but I'm hopeful that they can pull it off. On a side note, since we were talking about bananas, Fruit, maybe you could comment on banana beer, which is a thing, as I'm given to understand, in Africa. Is that the case?
Well, I am not very, very sure about that,
Oh,
Prof.
okay.
But if banana beer is locally made, a home industry, that is good because necessity is the mother of invention, and when it is locally made, it becomes product. But if it is coming from outside, it doesn't help the local economy because the local economy will be dependent. And even to go back to what Cliff was talking about the wars. Yes, Cliff, what you are saying is very right. And you know what made the West to turn over to Africa is because the West, they were fighting amongst themselves. The Italians never loved the English. The English never loved the French. The French never loved the Germans. If you look at the Austro-Prussian wars, the French, the Napoleonic wars with the Russia and all those things, it was in that basis that they were killing themselves. And the fact that they did not really, Europe was small, the weather was very, very not so good, and they didn't have most of the raw materials. So now they start this exploration. And when they reached Africa, they saw all these things there. They were now about to start fighting and killing themselves in Africa. Then they withdrew in 1884 in the Berlin Conference organized by Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, that instead of doing this, we should partition this vast continent that welcome us. And then they drew those imaginary lines. All of a sudden, like I went to Europe, in one person's house, on the other side is one country. That's in Europe. And on this side is another country. And that is what happened in Africa with families. You woke up one day, you are in a different country and they will force you to start speaking a different language.
So the U.S., I give the U.S. a lot of credit in this after World War II for pushing a lot of the European powers to withdraw from Europe, to give up their European, can I use, I don't want to use something derogatory for, but colonies, if that's the wrong word, I apologize, to remove their spheres of influence in Africa. So Africa has been given a lot more independence. The U.S. pushed the U.K. to pull out and pushed France. There were wars into the late, when is the Algerian War? Is that the 80s?
No,
70s?
50s, 60s. De
Okay.
Gaulle ended the war, so De Gaulle comes back in like 65 or so.
So there's a long time that Europe, of course, for 60, 80 years was and before was heavily involved in events in Africa and calling the shots in many ways. At the same time, since the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the continent of Africa has had its own independent countries, and they've been able to run things the way they want to. Now they have to do it correctly, and I think governance is an issue for them. But I think the rest of the world is certainly much better than it was from the time that you're talking about in terms of drawing borders and carving up little fiefdoms in Africa.
Prof, you are very right. From the 60s, during the government of President John F. Kennedy, with the Peace Corps, even the school, my high school that I came out of, was funded by the American and still supported by the American. It's one of like the Ivy colleges in Cameroon, caste family. If you go in any top Cameroonians who are out here in the world, they came from caste family. And with all the Peace Corps were going, they were actually educating people and building. So the Peace Corps started. That is how the American influence came in, contrasting what was happening from the European interest. And that when you look at most English-speaking countries, they are more close to America, more than their former British master. And most of the French countries, they tend out to be looking towards America because America came with an attitude of helping the local economy grow and building partnership that were profitable on both sides. Even though you are very right, I'm just echoing that.
I do think now Africa has to be very cautious about its relationship with China because China has acted in very self-interested ways and in ways that I want to be careful not to say the U.S. doesn't act in self-interested ways. Of course, the U.S. acts in self-interested, but you know the relationship of China and in places like Sri Lanka or in African countries, it has really exerted power in a way that I think has almost moved back toward a type of colonialism. So I think the nations of Africa need to be very cautious about their relationships with these countries.
And it is a little bit powerful because of one thing. You know, African culture is more or less close to Chinese culture. The difference is that the West should be able to understand the African in culture, that it is a culture of partnership and respect, not a culture that the West come in a condescending manner that we will dictate to you. If you look at the Western infrastructure that went into Africa, they were building skyscrapers that fit the West appetite. And in the end, the World Bank will give loans or so, but when they go, they don't listen to the locals, how they can collaborate with the locals. They bring their own design. They want to make African cities, European cities, or American cities. But the Chinese are coming in, they make believe that we are like one of you. We will listen to you. The Chinese, and Prof, you talked to us about the Chinese. Africa should also be very, very careful about with the Russians. They have the same attitude.
Yep. Before Fru escapes from us, I would like to switch over to the question of Iran versus Israel versus America versus American college students. I heard someone make a comment about Columbia University that it has become Hamas but with a lousy football team. So that didn't seem quite fair, but where do we stand here in the United States? You have Nancy Pelosi saying we shouldn't give weapons. You still there, Fru?
You shut his camera up, but he's here.
Oh, okay. We shouldn't give weapons
here.
to Israel. You have Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying that the Israeli Prime Minister has to go. You've got these demonstrations on the street. Columbia, I guess, is going, all classes are virtual today because of concerns about safety. Are we, is this a good situation? Are we divided on this strongly, or is this just a loud minority? Anybody got a thought?
Well, over the weekend, I heard, watching Al Jazeera, that we have troops in Iraq. We have a base in Iraq.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't Iraq just attack Israel?
That was Iran.
That was Iran. Okay, I got the wrong I country. Okay. So, Iran is now shooting missiles at our base in Iraq. So, they're still, the powers over in the Middle East are still kicking up a lot of dust looking for trouble. What do you think is on their mind to attack our, they're already lost to Israel, unbelievably lost to Israel. Now they're attacking our base. What goes through their mind?
So I think it's important to keep in Iran's, if you want to know what's going through their mind, you have to keep in mind what they're thinking about. And one of the things the Iranian regime has shown is that they are a weak regime. They're worried that their citizens are going to rise up and overthrow the government. The citizens of Iran, the average citizen, I don't think really likes the government very much. but they can't say very much.
Kind of like here.
No, not like here, because the government doesn't pick you up and put you in a prison and you end up dead because you weren't wearing your headscarf correctly. You look just at the way it's reacting, Iran is reacting to Israel, it looks like that was kind of lame what they did, and they showed they're actually not that powerful. At least, you know, the U.S. and Israel, and I think the UK was involved in stopping.
Jordan.
And Jordan, right.
Yeah.
And so these countries were pretty much capable of blunting the vast majority of the attack.
Iran also has some religious factors. They think that they've got the truth. They think that they should be running the Middle East. They also have this 12-year view of the culted imam who will come back in the last days and straighten everything out.
The Washington elected officials are sending, I think, it's $61 billion in the name of war. Much of it's going to Israel. A lot of it's going to three countries. Ukraine. Oh, I think Ukraine's
And Taiwan.
Ukraine's getting the biggest chunk of that.
They're
But Taiwan
getting
as
60
well.
billion, and Israel's getting 26 billion.
And Taiwan's getting
Yeah,
something.
14 like that.
And the homeless veterans are getting zippity-doo-dah, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. It's not okay that that's what the government's doing, but, and I bring up Al Jazeera because the American news doesn't cover this stuff. Like the stuff going on in Cameroon that comes up on Al Jazeera, you'd never hear on American news. So I like to watch Al Jazeera. I try to watch a little bit of them every morning.
Yeah, the American news media does not do a good job covering things outside the U.S., and I think that's actually because most Americans are not very interested in things outside the U.S. But we should be. We
A lot of people don't even travel outside the U.S. their whole life. You know, and then, you know how you're talking about Iran, they do have a fragile government, and you know, they have to put on the show or the illusion that they're in charge and things are going good. It's very limited. They control all the media and the newspapers, so what people get to see there, and it's not really any different in the United States. It's, you know, the media controls what we see and hear, is what the people are seeing. And people in Iran can't really travel outside the country very easily or even access information outside the country. So the government controls everything and what they see and hear and what they know. Also, their education system, how they're educating people.
Fru was going to say something, then I had something.
No, I was going to say that we can sit here, or the West can sit and talk about Iran and do whatever they are saying. When I was in Africa, when I came to this country in the university, I was embarrassed by university students believing that we in Africa live on trees, believing that we don't have infrastructure. And that is what the West will give the domestic. The people feel that these other countries, they don't know what they are doing. We know much better, and we probably will go around flocking ourselves that we know better. Those people don't know anything. So instead of dwelling on that, can we talk on the lives that are being destroyed, children, women, innocent people dying because of all these guns? Why do we always focus mostly on the guns and evade the true things? And then if you turn on the TV, we all as parents, are you very, very satisfied with the blood of the children that's spilling? Are these children, do these children, I have children, all of us here have children. When we look at that, does that really appeal to ourselves as parents to be looking at that and talking about more guns and all this? And I think we have lost our values and our souls to weaponizing.
I'll be right there, Tara. Thanks.
And if you talk even about whatever is going on, if you want to attack someone, do you have to tell that person ahead of hand? The person who tells the person is a sign of confidence that I know I am coming. Get prepared. You can talk. Cliff, I sent you something about Scott Reeder. Scott Reeder is American who was in Iran for the inspection of
Yeah.
all those. He narrated things very well. So when once we play it in such a way to undermine what others and think that other people don't reason, wisdom is never monopolized, and we look at it from our own vantage. And indeed, he who controls the media controls the narrative.
Well, there is that problem. He who controls the media controls the narrative. That's a whole new topic of, I think, especially NPR and their new CEO. But
I mean, I don't know how we change human nature to be more acceptable and more willing to get along. But as long as until we can get that under control, we're going to continue to see these wars and this violence. And I'm hoping that eventually we'll figure things out, because if we don't, that could be all it takes is now with nuclear weapons, one person to make a really bad choice, and there's no more livable planet.
Fru brought up the issue, but about the children suffering, and I think the place we see that most discussed right now is Gaza. But Hamas doesn't seem to be prepared to cut a deal. Is there something we can do to incentivize Hamas to cut a deal so that we can put an end to this situation?
So can I chime in
Yeah.
a little bit? I think it's really important to recognize the scale of the number of women and children that have been killed in Gaza. I mean, this is a huge number. You're talking about 30,000. And it's true that Hamas has been made things very difficult for Israel, but these are my tax dollars paying for a substantial portion of these weapons. And if I don't want that, then I shouldn't have to pay for that. And I think this is where you see the American citizens in Columbia University and other places saying, hey, look, Israel can do whatever they want, but why are they doing it with my tax money?
But Bill, don't you think we have to ask the same question? We have Ukraine, a very corrupt government. Why are we writing them a big fat check?
So Ukraine is not murdering citizens. They're not acting carelessly and causing the deaths of civilians, certainly not in the way that Russia or Israel are. At the very least, Israel is being negligent.
How much of
at the least, and I think
Bill,
it's
how much
much
of
worse
the billions of dollars that are going over there, there'll be no accounting for it. There'll be no audit of the money. How much money do you think the government officials are going to stick in their pocket?
So are you saying that doesn't happen in Israel, or are you saying that murdering children is worse than that?
I'm just saying there's no accounting for this money.
That's not true. There are the U.S. government has a government accounting office. You think we don't pay attention to where money goes?
We don't. This ticks people off. Does anybody ever get fired?
Well, we have elections and people lose elections.
No, I mean, who work for the federal government, the auditors. Does anybody get fired?
I presume they do. I can't come up with cases. If you break the law, you do go to jail in the United
just
States.
if you don't do the job.
Driving under the influence. So, okay, Fru,
Bye, Fru.
I'll be sending you an
Bye,
email.
bro. Yeah.
Bro, have a good week.
Yep. See you next Monday, Fruit.